Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for a wonderful invitation and wonderful salmon. It was delicious. Thank you again. Last week it was, I think I spoke about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Was it last week?
Yeah.
Yes. And I'd rather not talk about the same subject. You will hear a great deal more about it at other times. But today I really want to focus on something that has raised many issues. And that is the Iran deal and its ramifications. Let me begin by saying at the onset that I supported the Iran deal. But to suggest that the Iran deal was the best deal or the perfect deal, that is not the case. That is, considering the circumstances under which this deal was concluded, was negotiated and concluded, it is much better not to have one. But having said that, we have to look at the situation that is from the Iranian perspective and ask the basic first question. With this deal, will Iran be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons? My answer to that is that Iran will eventually acquire nuclear weapons. The question is only when, under what circumstances, and why. But let me begin this discussion first by suggesting to you what Iran is all about, in order to lead to the point that I will be concluding with why Iran will eventually acquire such a weapon and will become a nuclear power. So we have to look at Iran as a country with a very long history, continuing history for 4,000 years. Iran is a proud nation, has tremendous resources. It is situated at one of the most crucial geographic area in the world. And it has a very inventive, very creative population, more than 60% under the age of 30 years old. It has been a dynamic country historically, and its population today, with nearly 80 million Iranians, the majority of which are Shiite, represent much larger number than the combined Sunni population in the entire Gulf. So in order to understand the mindset, the psychology of the Iranians, you have to be in their shoe, understand where they're coming from, why they have that kind of pride, why they seek so much respect, and why they feel that they have the right to be the region's hegemon. And when you look at it from a religious perspective, you also find out that very few people actually recognize the fact that there are more Shiite in Iran itself than the entire Sunni community in the entire Gulf. That is 72 million versus about 53 million. So again, that's from a psychological perspective. Iran feels it has the right to be the dominant power, even from a religious perspective. Now, having been not so wisely, as a result of the Iraq war, Iran was given probably an historic price that has never been dreamed of, and that is being able to influence Iraq and have such a strong foothold in Iraq today like it has never had before. I want you to remember that Iraq and Iran, in modern times as well as historically, been always sort of enemies, or at minimum rivals in the region. As a matter of fact, the United States deliberately maintains a policy of a mutual containment, containing Iraq and Iran going back to the Truman era, to ensure that neither countries will have the upper hand in that part of the world. And this will explain to you why President Reagan and Israel actually, one supported the Iraqis and the other ones, the United States, supported the Iranian with the Contra deal affair. Because we were determined then not to allow either country to change the status quo. But what the Iraq war has done, it has revolutionized that status quo. It has changed a very dramatic way, and it is not likely to reverse itself anytime. Now, I want you now to put yourself in the Iranian position and think, where do you want to be? That is, Iran's ambition to become the region hegemon will not change. But how Iran is going to be able to accomplish that? So we have to look at the nuclear weapons not as a tool and a means by which to attack other countries, be that Israel, or threaten the West by it, but only as a tool by which to augment its position in the region, to be able to dictate, to influence in a very dramatic way the entire neighborhood. Iran has also another concern. It is in a very troubled area. It has a neighbor with a nuclear weapon, which is Pakistan. It is neighbor with Afghanistan, which is completely unstable. It has concern over other parts on the east side, so that Iran has, you might say, legitimate national security concerns. And certainly, Iran also would like to neutralize Israel's nuclear capability. But that is not to suggest that the Iranian would like to attack Israel with any kind of nuclear weapons, because they will know that the second retaliatory reaction will basically could devastate, if not annihilate, all of Iran. That is not on their agenda. But why are they pursuing this? I want you to go I will take you with me country by country. To begin with, start with Iraq. Now that Iran basically dominate Iraq, it is critically important for Iran to maintain its influence from Iraq, that is from the Gulf to the Mediterranean, which means maintaining its influence in Iraq will help it continue its battle, and I will talk about it in a moment, in Syria, that is its influence in Syria, and through Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Mediterranean. That is, this is a crescent of landmass, contiguous landmass, that for Iran is the most strategic crescent and want to maintain control over it under any and all circumstances. This will explain to you then why Iran is totally and completely committed to maintain and strengthen Bashar Assad rule in Syria. For Iran, Syria is the linchpin to this crescent. Under no circumstances will Iran sit down and negotiate a deal about the future of Syria to end this horror, the tragic civil war that has claimed more than 300,000 casualties, destroyed nearly half the country, with more than half of the population either became refugees or internally displaced. This is a tragedy that we have not seen since World War II. But if you were to ask what has prolonged this horrifying conflict, this civil war, you will find that Iran itself has contributed directly and indirectly to the prolongation of the war, because under no circumstances would Iran want to see Bashar Assad removed unless it can secure its place and continuing its influence in Syria beyond Assad. This will explain to you now, if these negotiations now about Syria's future take place, and when they take place, you'll find that Iran had to be invited to the negotiating table, because the United States, the European community, just about everyone throughout the Middle East understood that if Iran is not at the negotiating table, there will be no deal, because Iran will continue to disrupt, to support all the elements that are fighting against Bashar Assad. So Iran today has secured its position, its chair at the negotiating table as far as the future of Syria is concerned. And now you can imagine Syria will continue to be influenced by Iran for as far as the eye can see, or else there will be no deal. In Iraq, Iran position is based on entirely different kind of calculation. The Iraq War instigated an old, dormant, millennia-old conflict between the Sunni and the Shiite. This is a conflict that is going to be with us not for a few more years. I dare to tell you decades to come. Because the conflict between the Sunni and the Shiite is one that is going to determine who is going to lead Islam. That is, Saudi Arabia sees itself as the custodian of Sunni Islam. Iran sees itself as the custodian of Shiite Islam. They are neighbors, and they are competing for the region's hegemony. And all for their own reasons. So therefore, the civil war, which has not been talked about as a civil war that's been going on in Iraq since the end of the war of 2003, there's been continuing civil war in Iraq between the Sunni and the Shiite, claiming nearly 1,000 casualties every single month. As we speak, this carnage continues. And that war in Iraq will continue as long as the Saudis and the Iranians will not come to an agreement as to how to end this horrifying conflict that is claiming the lives of so many and destroying so much. I take you then to Lebanon. Now we understand why Iran is such a staunch supporter of Hezbollah. For Iran, Hezbollah is nothing but the element, the organization, the institution that it is needed there to make sure that Lebanon remains under the influence of Iran itself. Hezbollah does the bidding for Iranian government. Hezbollah today is supporting and fighting on the side of Assad. Is provided by weapons, money, financial, everything they need from the Saudis. From the Iranian. And that will continue for as far as the eye can see, because Hezbollah also present a threat to Israel, and that's how the Iranians would like to see that tension on Israel's northern border continue from Lebanon as well as from Syria, without, however, encouraging either side, either the Syrians or the Lebanese or Hezbollah, to challenge Israel, because they do not want that to happen. Instead, they want Israel to remain always on alert, spend millions and millions of dollars in order to protect its northern border, basically in an effort to exhaust Israel, at least financially. Now, when you look at this picture, that is Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Now what they wanted to do is to go beyond this crescent and go into the Arabian Peninsula. And the Arabian Peninsula was Yemen provided Iran with the best possible opportunity, with the Houthis trying to unseat the government. And the civil war has been going on now in Yemen for some time. The Saudis, that was an absolutely non-starter. For the Saudis to allow any kind of influence of Iran in the Arabian Peninsula is simply and totally unacceptable. And that is the reason why Saudi Arabia decided to go in force to support the government against the Houthis. And that conflict is going to also continue for some time unless you begin to solve the conflict in Syria, and then in Lebanon, and then in Iraq. Because from Iranian perspective, what has been able to accomplish, what has been able to achieve, it will not relinquish, because that is a long-term plan that Iran has and will continue to embrace for years to come. And the fifth element is Iran continuing desire to influence other parts of the Middle East. And if it cannot do so directly, it do so through extremism, violent extremism, and terrorism, with the means and the ability to finance such a group in order to stabilize the area where it seeks some kind of instability to further its goals and its purposes. The implementation now of the Iran deal, what would that do? Iran deal, without any question, and its implementation, it's providing now Iran with more than $100 billion. Now, if you calculate some of what Iran owes and will have to pay, it will still net with more than $60 billion. And now it will be able to begin to produce more oil. It will continue as we speak. Rouhani is in France and elsewhere. Major, massive deals are being made between Iran and the West in the tens of billions of dollars. But also Iran will have the means by which to support its surrogates, its war in Iraq, its interest in Syria, its support of Hezbollah, its support of the Houthis, and in support of extremism wherever Iran feels it's necessary and needed. You need to look at it from this perspective to understand what it is then that motivates Iran. Will embracing Iran internationally, in economic, financial sense, in cooperation, in various areas, in aviation and otherwise, will that moderate the Iranian position? This is really the most significant question that needs to be answered honestly and truly. But how do you know? You speculate. President Obama correctly saw it and was able to make this deal. But this deal, however, it's necessary because it delayed perhaps the inevitable. But it is better to delay it. Maybe there's still hope, and this is what President Obama feels. Maybe during this period, the next 5, 7, up to 10 years, Iran will change its nature. Iran will change its regional ambition. Iran will become a part and parcel of the international community, and hence it will have no need, no desire to acquire nuclear weapons. I cannot tell you that this prospect is zero, but it's certainly not necessarily a promising one. And why is it not? Why is it not? Because I want you now to imagine that Iran, that has the capacity and the means by which to have nuclear weapons, it was under huge economic stress throughout this period of massive sanction it was imposed upon it. And for good reason, Rouhani came to the realization, we might as well make a deal, get the kind of relief we want. We lived continuously for 4,000 years. What matters if we wait 5, 6, 7 years to pursue our ultimate goal? You have to understand, for Iran to wait 5 or 6 or 7 years is considered seconds, minutes, when you compare it to its long and continuing history. They can wait. But now you have to look at the regime itself. That is, they can wait provided that the regime remain in place. This will explain to you now probably the most important reason why Iran will continue to pursue the acquisition of a nuclear power, because the mullahs, Khomeini, the Revolutionary Guards are absolutely determined to maintain, to keep this regime for as far as they can see. But the only way they can do so, it is by making sure there will be no pressure coming from the outside, be that from the United States, be that from the European community, or any other enemy from the region that can in fact threaten the regime. That is, they are terrified of many things, but they are terrified the most of regime change. And they look at Pakistan, and they look at India, and they look at Israel, and for them there's plenty of examples, including North Korea, and anyone would come to the same conclusion. Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, and India fought 3 wars. But once they acquired a nuclear weapon, there were no wars anymore between Pakistan and India, and for good reason. No one is challenging today North Korea because it has a nuclear weapon, and no one, in fact, can challenge Israel effectively because of its nuclear arsenals that's ready to be fired almost in a moment's notice. For Iran, therefore, to secure its regime for the long term, it wants such a weapon in order to make sure that the regime itself is not threatened. But there is another critical element to keep in mind. This is the Islamic regime. It is only from 79, that is basically only 36 years old. This is a 36 years old that hasn't been able as yet to consolidate its national identity under Islamic regime. Iran was never governed by an Islamic regime before, not once. But in order for the Islamic regime to consolidate and become a de facto in the life of the Iranians for as long as they can, acquiring the nuclear weapon under the aegis of the Islamic regime will give it the credibility, the strength, the respect, and be able to also identify it as a great power under Islamic regime. This is extremely important to understand, specifically when you take that and compare it because against Pakistan. Pakistan is the only Muslim country that has a nuclear power weapon, and so does Iran would like to have it as the Shiite leading country. Now then, we have to, if we look at all of these elements, we have to carefully consider what direction will Iran take in the end. And let me just spend 2 or 3 minutes on the deal itself, and I went to deliberately backwards why I thought the deal was better than no deal, but it's not a perfect deal. The deal itself will allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon within the next, say, 10 or 15 years, if not much less than that. The deal has 3 major flaws. One, however the President of the United States described the inspection, how tough they are going to be. There are many loopholes as far as the inspections are. There are facilities, military facilities, where the Iranian demanded and the United States had to accept that there will be no monitoring there without prior notification, at least for 2 weeks, for them to have another week to consider it, and only in the 4th week, by the 25th day, they will be able to come. You can imagine what they can do in the course of 3.5 weeks. The next provision is that the expiration of the deal itself. That is, if Iran does not violate the agreement, it is going to expire in 10 years. It will have no pressure, no requirement. It will be treated just like any other member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran will be free to do pretty much what it wants to do, should it continue, and my feeling it will continue to seek a nuclear weapon. The third flaw in the agreement is what has been done with the facilities, the nuclear facilities that Iran has today. It has disabled more than 10,000 refugees, but they are there. It has disabled the arc plants that produce plutonium for nuclear weapons, but it's still there, which means the facilities by themselves, they're still in place. None of them was actually destroyed or removed completely. And I remember Kissinger saying more than a year and a half ago, when this talk about negotiation with Iran were going on, he said, no deal is worth the paper it's written on unless much of these facilities are dismantled. Some would say that President Obama was only too eager to agree to make a deal, and therefore he had to make these significant concessions. But here comes the final point that I want to make, and that is the criticism that the Obama administration has been getting because of that is really not warranted. Because the assumption is that if you continue to negotiate and play tough, then the Iranians, under tremendous economic pressure, will eventually give in. My answer to that, no, they will not give in. The Iranians have been able to live under whatever conditions you might say, under the severe crippling sanctions for more than 10 years, for 12 years. And they will continue to be able to manage and suffer, because there's one thing that Iran will not give in onto under any circumstances, and that is its self-respect, its pride, and it is unwillingness under any circumstances to kneel to anyone. We have to keep this psychological mindset, because this is critically important to understand. This is not limited to deals, to oil, to airplanes, to borders. It is a mindset embedded in a long history. It has a deep religious perspective, deep historical perspective, deep social, economic and political perspective, and hence, this is a process for the Iran. They will go through the process. And the final word is that whether, in my view, will Iran get the nuclear weapon, whether in 10 years or 12 years, Iran, as I said earlier, is not necessarily going to attack anyone, but then is going to be in a position to exercise the kind of hegemony it seeks. But in the interim, those countries who feel threatened by it, specifically the Saudis, the other Gulf states, are going to continue to be extremely weary, extremely anxious, extremely fearful, and it is entirely possible that this will not, that proliferation of a nuclear weapon may still take place throughout the region. So we can only hope and side with President Obama and say, let us hope that he is correct in his assessment, that Iran will come and join the community of nations and become a peaceful country. I still have serious doubt about that. Thank you very much.